if I can just start, obviously, by saying a huge welcome to everybody that's here today. I'm conscious that there are people who are here for the first time, although we're relatively small in numbers compared to our usual group size. There are people who are here for the first time, and I appreciate, as we all do, how difficult that is to kind of come to one of these meetings the first time. So please do speak to any of us and let us know if you're finding anything difficult or a bit overwhelming. We've also got people who are with us today who are sadly bereaved and here for the first time. So again, there's a different level of emotional sort of need and response that's involved in coming again to a meeting following a sad sort of loss. So again, if people are happy and able to share, we're here to support as far as we can. One or two just really brief housekeeping notices, and that's to say we're trialling a slightly different format today to the way the meeting runs, and we're going to have lunch provided here, a sandwich lunch provided here over a sort of informal conversation time. So previously we've left the meeting and gone for lunch, but our meetings were overrunning so that lunch was kind of not happening till 3 o'clock, which meant it was difficult for people to coordinate. So let's see how it goes with this arrangement today and have any feedback to me in terms of your preferences on that. Our agenda for today is really very straightforward. It's a real privilege to have both Emilie, Brotherhood, and Sebastian Crutch, who are colleagues at the Dementia Research Centre, here with us today. I know Emilie has already been speaking to one or two people about research opportunities at the Dementia Research Centre, and it will be great to hear a little bit more now in terms of the research that both Seb and Emilie are conducting with regards to frontotemporal dementia. So without further ado, I hand over to Seb and Emilie, and our agenda will roll from there.
Thanks Jill, and thank you to everyone for coming today. I'm here today to talk to you about the project that Seb and I are working on. It's new and it's very much in the initial stages, so all throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, just jump in. I'm happy to answer them as we go along or at the end. So the project that we're starting is called C-PLACID. Sorry for the very awakening colour this morning. It doesn't look like this on the computer, so I hope you can see the rest of the presentation okay. C-PLACID has a very long title, which stands for the Computational Platform for the Assessment of Cognition in Dementia. That means absolutely nothing to you, and it shouldn't, so I'm going to go through this presentation and try to explain a little bit about what we're going to try to do in this new project. It's due to run for 3 years, and there's the opportunity for both you and the person you might care for to take part in it. So first of all, what are we trying to achieve with the C-PLACID project? Well, differences in cognitive skills might have been the first thing that you noticed about the person that you care for or cared for, or it might be the thing that you notice most predominantly in the future might change. So perhaps when we come to research at the DRC, what we're trying to do is we always try and measure these different cognitive skills, and these can be things like language and memory. The way that we do it at the moment is to take you through these battery of tests, which we have a collection of tests which assess different kinds of cognition, like language and memory. Some of you might be familiar with some of the images I'm about to show up on the screen, or you might have heard about it if you've participated in research before at the DRC, or kindly waited in reception while the person you cared for did the test with us. So some of those might look a little bit familiar to you. So the information on the tests that we do at the moment are really valuable, and we really appreciate the time that you and the person that you care for take out to come and do the research with us. But let's face it, if you or the person who you cared for have told you anything about the tests, or you've experienced them yourself, I think you might agree with me when I say that they're very long, they're not particularly exciting for you to do. For example, recalling lots of lists of words that you don't really think is particularly necessary, and sometimes the test instructions can be so confusing you think that just getting through the instructions is the challenge as opposed to actually the task itself. So the overall aim of this C-PLACID project is to try and improve these cognitive tests for you and the person you care for, to measure cognition better, and so we're going to try and use new technology to make these tests more simple, less confusing, shorter, and more realistic to the kind of behaviour that you might experience with the person you care for in day-to-day life. So what kind of skills do we assess at the moment? Well, with these collections of tests, they're normally done using pen and paper, and like I said, you are asked to remember a list of words or faces, or try and name some pictures and tell us what they are. So all those kind of examples that I've given are really good examples of ways to try and measure language and memory. So we've got vocabulary, which obviously assesses language skills, and memory for faces and words, which assesses memory skills. But you know, probably better than we do, that especially for you all sitting here today, the person that you care for might not predominantly have problems with memory and language. And it might actually be that it's their social skills that are more of a challenge nowadays, and the fact that you can't really go out to dinner anymore because, for example, you found that last time you went out for dinner that your person you cared for behaved in a way that other people found odd or perhaps a little difficult to deal with. So at the moment, although these tests are great for measuring cognition that's more related to typical dementias such as Alzheimer's disease, trying to assess cognitive skills that are more related to the rarer dementias, such as FTD, isn't really captured in this collection of tests. So the idea of C-PLACID, and one main part of it, is to try and assess social skills, and do it in a way that isn't just a pen and paper test. Because if you think about it, if you have a conversation with someone, that involves a lot of social skills that are very complex and intricate, that you can't really capture on asking someone a list of questions or to write down what they felt was appropriate in a social situation, because that means that actually you're relying on someone to be able to convey their thoughts and communicate their thoughts about how they interact with people, which is actually a very difficult thing to do. So the way that we're proposing that we use new technology is to try and capture the intricate aspects of social skills, and try and read, for example, see if people can read recognise emotions from different people when they're interacting with them. So how might new technology help us to do this? So I'm sure you've all seen on the agenda and when the emails were sent out that we mentioned virtual reality. Now, this is a completely foreign concept to me, and maybe, forgive my ignorance, maybe it isn't to some of you, but for those who are new to the idea, I'd just like to take you through how I think what virtual reality is, first of all, and then how we're going to use it in this project to try and assess people's social skills. So virtual reality is basically a three-dimensional scenario which is generated by a computer. So you can see that you stand in a room and there are three walls around you and there's space behind you. So you can see this lady is standing in the virtual reality lab at UCL. And you can see that it's a bathroom scene, it's quite realistic, and that she's standing slightly to the left. So on the far side is one wall, she's facing another, and then the right side wall. But you can see that you've got the dressing gown sort of draping on the floor, so you might think that this doesn't look very realistic because everyone else's dressing gowns hang neatly. But if you've ever gone to the cinema and seen a film in 3D, and you had to put the glasses on, if you take the glasses off, you might see that the film is sort of blurry, or the screen doesn't quite look realistic to you. But once you put the glasses back on, it's fine, and it's in the right perspective for you. So this lady's wearing glasses that when she puts the glasses on, the dressing gowns are sort of neatly against the door. So when I say realistic, it's very difficult to capture what being in virtual reality is like, because obviously when you take a photograph, you're seeing it sort of warped. But this is essentially what the room would look like, that we would be asking people to walk around in and experience. So we can design scenarios, any scenarios, for example, and for this project we'd be simply designing realistic scenes like cafes or pubs or areas that you might find yourself in social situations day to day. But the best thing about virtual reality is that you can assess social interactions because you can put characters called avatars, who are virtual people, into the environment. So just to give you an example, from a study that was done at UCL a couple of years ago, these are two characters that you would put in the virtual reality scenario. And you can see that they're just having a chat. And when you're standing where that lady's standing, they might be to the right of you, and you're either observing them or you're welcome to go and interact with them. whatever you feel is appropriate, and they may respond to you just as a person would if you were sitting on a park bench and you struck up a conversation with them. So to give you a bit more of a perspective about what virtual reality looks like, I'm just going to play you a very, very short video. Now you might notice something is happening a little bit that might seem a little bit strange or a little bit odd that one of the characters is doing. But this video is looking as if you're looking through the virtual reality glasses. So when you put these glasses on, if you look to the right of the screen, the scene moves just if you were looking to the right in this room right now. So I'm just going to play this for you. Sorry, the sound's not working, but there are sort of sights and sounds you might expect to hear in a cafe. So, for example, laughter, chatting. And you can see this female character is just sort of creeping through the scene. And it would be part of some of the scenario experiments to see, to see whether or not, if you just want to observe, or you interact, and sort of see what the experience is like for you. So this is really the crux of the C-PLACID project and using virtual reality to measure social behaviour. Basically what we want to do is try and see if we can come up with social scenarios that look at differences in the way that people with and without FTD might behave. Well, there's plenty of different ways we can look. Sorry, Seb, feel free to jump in at any time. So we can look at outcome measures like physical outcomes, like if the person moved towards the character or moved away from them, and we would interpret that as perceiving. If someone moved away, for example, you might perceive that, or might infer that as someone seeing it as odd behaviour. Or we can look at where someone's looking in the room using eye tracking measures. And so, for example, if someone that you care for is normally very apathetic to a situation and doesn't seem to be engaging with it, they might still be looking at the people talking, which might give some indication that they are still engaging with the situation, but they're just not being very proactive about it. Good question, and I realise I haven't really gone into it. So, when you went, or when the person you cared for was initially assessed, or you went to the doctor and said, I'm having concerns about my partner, relative, friends, cognitive health, they probably did a number of assessments that, like at the DRC, mainly rely on testing things like memory and language. But because not exclusively, but because one of the main problems with FTD, or the difficulties with people with FTD, is their social skills, the idea is that if we can find a way of tapping into those differences in social skills early than what we do at the moment, which isn't, at the moment our knowledge of assessing social skills is quite poor relative to language and memory. If we can develop tests that can be parallel to those tests of memory and language, then we can actually look at using this clinically in terms of earlier diagnosis and in terms of tracking longitudinal change and change over the years. So does that answer your question in terms of we're trying to bring social skills up with memory and language measures so that they're parallel, so that we treat them the same as the kind of social skills that are more typically associated with Alzheimer's disease?
If I could chip in, so I think one of the other things, hopefully, a lot of, unfortunately, at the moment, we obviously would desperately like to have cures for these sorts of conditions, but a lot of our role at the DRC is a bit like future-proofing. It's saying, if someone comes up with a compound, a chemical in a year's time, 2 years' time, 10 years' time, have we done absolutely everything we can now, so when that day comes, we can immediately test whether this thing is effective or not. Because sometimes we've seen in Alzheimer's disease, sometimes particularly the case for the sad families that we work with, where unfortunately FTD runs, I don't know if that affects anybody here, but where it runs in the family, because poor people know that many of them know that they're at risk of developing these symptoms, but the stage at which the changes start to emerge remains really murky and unclear. And again, it might be in those people that these sorts of measures potentially can pick up more rapidly the very early signs and give people a clear answer again of, am I at that stage now? Do I need to start making things that are plans for my life, or is actually everything fine?
Yes, and of course this is why assessing social behaviour has been something that in psychology as a whole it's been sort of put almost to one side, because it's seen as sort of far easier to look at something like memory. Did you remember the word or did you not? It's quite a simple, relatively simple metric to look at. Whereas social behaviour, I'm sure each of us could come up with completely different reactions to just that scene. So of course it is, on an individual basis, quite difficult to look at social behaviour. But what we're looking for in this C-PLACID project is to look at group differences. So on the whole, if people with FTD behave differently in social scenarios, in social scenario A compared to people, sort of healthy volunteers. So we're really looking at a group level, and it might be in the future that we start to sort of fine-tune these scenarios to maybe be more individually tailored. But at the moment it's looking at group differences. Yes, yes, just as you said very correctly, the way of looking at individual changes in an individual and someone's personal perspective on something is to test them again and again and again, and over different time points, and then see, as you say, if their behaviour changes at all. So that, again, is a potential for future projects, and we do emphasise that this is in the very early stages, so we would be looking primarily at, in the first instance, I think, jump in if I'm wrong, but in the first instance is for group differences on one scenario.
But I think one of the advantages of doing it we're trying to make it more real, obviously it's still a test, it's not the real world, but one of the advantages to trying to develop a test is you get to play initially with a whole set of different stories or scenarios, and you get to throw out the ones where there's a lot of variability. So it might well be that there are some scenes which some people don't do anything, some people perform completely differently, help people, but there are likely to be some scenes where that range is narrowed down a bit, or where you get the advantage, whereas in real life there's such an enormous difference in the way that we experience life. I think the best example of what you said of people being very different to the way that they respond and interpret different behaviours. I remember one of my colleagues saying to me that he once had a session in the clinic, someone came, there had been some concern from other family members that this gentleman had changed in his personality, the way that he was interacting with other people. And my colleague thought that was correct from what he'd heard, but his wife didn't seem to think so. And he pushed and he asked all the questions that usually trigger some sort of registration that yes, that has changed. Perhaps it might have been changes in dietary preference and sweet foods and some of the things which might have been talked about in this group before. And this lady denied, she said, no, that's not the case, not the case. And my clinical colleague didn't know what to do in that situation. And then just as she was walking out the door, she said, well, there is one thing. Sometimes when we're out shopping, we'll just run up behind a stranger and blow raspberry. But that's just funny, isn't it? So it's not just that we all work, that we all behave in different ways. The range of ways in which our behaviour is interpreted by others is also very variable. And the idea with this is that because all of our lives are different, we can't compare one person's odd behaviour to another person's odd behaviour, particularly if we've not been there and we think all second hand. Whereas this gives us the chance to say, put different people in exactly the same situation, not just to compare between them, but also, as you say, to compare over time. And sometimes even from, again, we often have the story that carers say, I think things are really changing, it's really not what it was. But all the family tell me I should stop being like him, he's fine, and no one else
I think it's also just to emphasise this point, because I haven't put this in the presentation, but that you can it's looking at the reaction in real time. So there's no there's no potential to sort of confabulate or to write, you know, if someone wrote down how they might react in a situation, there's lots of there's something called social desirability, where you might write down what you think the person wants to hear, but actually if you're in a situation and you're dealing with a character, you're probably more likely to react how you really would act. So it's quite, what we think is quite a true measurement of how someone would behave. So I just realised, just to tag on to that point, but I realised that I hadn't really put that in the presentation, but that's really what virtual reality allows us to do.
Can I just give one other example? So it's, I'm sure, very clear to me, I'm no virtual reality expert whatsoever, but we're working with people at UCL who are, and their approach over a number of years has been the first in helping people to establish that this technique can realistically simulate different social scenarios. So that what they've done is they've taken lots of effects which have been known within the social psychology field for many years, and they're trying to replicate them. So one quite cute example they had was they recruited a whole bunch of Arsenal football fans, and they put them into a scenario like the one you saw a little bit earlier on, with someone in a white shirt, someone in a red shirt, and this was the example of experiment I took part in. And you walk in and you speak to the person, in this case in the red shirt, and then you just get to know them for a little while. And there were some pre-recorded conversations. So there's some that's saying to you, "Oh, it's been rubbish this season, haven't they?" And there's a little bit of banter. And even though you know it's not a real scenario, you find yourself engaging with this person because they're asking questions about, you know, what do you think about Fabregas, should they have sold it? You know, all these things, because they've pre-recorded a set of different conversations and dialogues, so it can be woven together, so it feels like a real conversation. But then the whole point of the experiment was to test something called the bystander effect. So you got to know this person, and then someone else in the pub, in this case the person in the white shirt, started being a little bit aggressive towards them, sort of saying, "You know, what are you looking at?" And just being a little bit assertive, and it gradually sort of being quite rude to them. And they found an incredibly subtle effect. If the person who was being picked on was wearing a red shirt, you were more likely, the Arsenal fans were more likely to step in than if they were wearing a white shirt at the top of the pack. And so even in such a, even such a subtle difference was able to be protected in the amount that they try to place themselves between the two characters to break it up. And the amount of verbal utterances they made was, so they can quantify the speech, your spatial position within the room, and your facial expression, all sorts of different aspects of behaviour in quite, to my eyes, quite a sophisticated way to try and capture some of the subtleties of obviously what's a complex interaction.
Does anyone have any other questions? Okay, so you've all been very extremely accepting of the concept of virtual reality, or perhaps, if I was sitting where you are, I'd be thinking, no way. But I would just like to try and allay some of any concerns you might have by just saying why it is a great social measure, if we haven't already banged on about it enough already. So, first of all, it's a safe and ethical way of exploring the kind of social skills. So, some of the more challenging behaviour that you might have experienced with the people that you care for. So, for example, swearing, somebody swearing more often than they used to in social scenarios might be something that you've experienced personally, related to the person that you care for. And the main thing about interacting with avatars and characters that aren't real is that they won't judge the behaviour as anything because they're not real, as either you or the person that you care for being in the environment, in the virtual scenario. So, and also we could bring actors in and have them act out a scene and just leave the virtuality to one side, but there's also the ethical risk of the actors being distressed by any behaviour of the person that you care for. So it's unlikely, but it's just to really safeguard the ethical, issues, both in terms of the person that you care for and for other people who might be involved in a more natural social experiment. From our point of view, it's great science because it means that we can test the same scenario again and again, exactly the same way with different people. So again, if you bring actors in, yes, they're professional, but we're all human. And so it might be that they smile more widely at one participant compared to another, and that might generate the different effect, not the fact that they're in scenario A or B. So it's good from a point of ethics, and it's good from the point of science. Oh. About to skip through the most important one. It's realistic. Compared to the kind of social tests that we have at the moment that you do on pen and paper, it's really trying to take those anecdotes that you come to us in clinic and speak about, that we've been hearing about them for years and years. But virtual reality is really the first opportunity that we think we can actually design scenarios that are based around those stories and see if we can find group differences or time change differences within an individual tailored to those stories. So both you and the person you care for, as I mentioned at the beginning, have the opportunity to be a part of this study, should you choose. First of all, we're in the process of designing some scenarios that we think might be good initial tests of social skills, and so for this we'd be recruiting 8 healthy volunteers and 2 participants with FTD. And this is just to see, again, also how someone who hasn't experienced virtual reality before might handle the situation, and if they enjoy it, and get some feedback about the scenarios from both carers and the people with FTD. If that all goes successfully, we're hoping by the start of 2016 to recruit 60 people with dementia, but particularly 20 people with FTD, and similar numbers for those at risk of FTD. And then this is where your chance comes in of being recruited or participating in C-PLACID as a healthy volunteer. In terms of the sessions themselves, this project's running for a couple of years, so there's lots of opportunity to be involved with different scenarios as well. So each session, if you were to accompany the person that you care for to the session, would last about 2 hours. So this would involve travel to the virtual reality lab, which is just down the road from the DRC, or a short taxi ride away, I should say. And it would also include some questionnaires. So it's not that you're spending 2 hours in this room. It would be the case that there's lots of other little things that we'd be getting you to do along the way. So in terms of one session, I'm just going to walk you through the procedure just so that you know what to expect if you did decide to participate in the study. So first of all, we'd ask you to do a questionnaire just to see how you're feeling on the day before you go in. And then we'd ask you to put on the equipment, which is simply a case of putting on virtual reality glasses that look a little bit like snorkeling goggles, and they can fit over prescription glasses if you wear them. Then we'd walk you into the virtual reality room, and you can see it before you go in, and then we'd just ask you to have a bit of a walk around and just a chat with potentially some avatars and characters that we might bring in. And then we'd have a bit of a break, and if you liked it or didn't mind going back in, then we would go in for a little bit longer, and then you'd observe or interact with some other characters, perhaps in a different scene. Then once that's over, after about 10 minutes, we'd take you out again, and then we'd ask you just to complete the same questionnaires before you went in, just to see how you're feeling and to get some feedback about your experience. Showed you the best bit about the end. In terms of feedback that we're asking for today, or interested in finding out from you today, is just about virtual reality in general, because I know it's a very new concept to me, and I'm sure it's a very new concept to a lot of you here today. And any questions or thoughts you might have about the study in terms of if you think it will actually make a difference, or what you think about the current tests now that you think that C-PLACID, the project, could address. If you have any questions that you can think of after the session, then you're very welcome to get in contact with me, Emilie, at the email address, which I'm sure Jill will circulate after the session. And I'd also be really interested if any of you are willing. I've got some sheets of paper just asking if you wouldn't mind sharing, or if you feel comfortable sharing some of your experiences or social situations that you perhaps found yourself in with the person that you care for. We might use this as a starting point for the discussion group this afternoon, but as I say, this is completely voluntary, and please don't feel obliged to do it. But it might be that we might take inspiration from some of these stories that you've kindly shared with us, and then perhaps build them into the experiment. So that's the project. Thank you very much for listening. And again, if you have any questions now or throughout the day, then please feel free just to raise your hand or talk to me at any point. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? So the question was, the session's 2 hours long for a virtual reality session, but how many times do you need to come? So this really depends on what's convenient for you and the person that you care for, because we understand that, you know, it's for some of you who especially aren't local, it's a lot of logistics travelling to and from London, or even if you live in London, it's logistics travelling around London. So it's really dependent on you. What we've outlined is that there will be, over the next couple of years, about 10 research visits. But what we would envisage is that we would put these alongside other studies, perhaps over a 1 or 2 day visit. So there'll be other things that you'll be doing as well, as part of other studies. So it's sort of as a slight package deal, although do feel free. Obviously, you would be completely free to drop in and out as you please.
I was going to say, even just once would be helpful.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
It's you sort of don't know what will work best. I mean, it might be my experience of research is it doesn't work this way, but it might be that we get the perfect set of scenarios first off.
Oh, we will. No, it's fine. We probably.
Will very quickly, and actually then don't need to do any more. It's more thinking up to 10 sessions in case we just the worst case scenario. But it might be, I think most likely it will be a couple of sessions, possibly 3, because we might want to say, okay, well, we've done these sets of tests which are good at looking at one particular type of social skill, and now can we build on that and tap another set of social skills? So, because as we all know, our interactions with other people are very complex, and we know from our experience working with some people report particular difficulties, for example, with disinhibition, with the filters going, so that there's more behaviour, more challenging, difficult behaviour at an early stage. For other people, there's less behaviour. People are apathetic and don't seem to. For other people, there's sometimes a change in empathy, so they behave normally in certain situations. I remember the sort of starting story that one lady said that being in the kitchen on the phone, she'd just been told that the close relative died. She floods in tears, and her husband just walked in, made a cup of tea, and walked out again. And we said those are all just those 3 examples of very different social skills, different parts of the brain involved in supporting our ability to behave appropriately, socially appropriately in those different situations. And yet we have no tests at the moment capturing them. So as I say, it might be just that we have 1 or 2 dance thinking, but I imagine if we're successful with the approach, generally works if people are happy, most importantly, in doing these sorts of tests. We might.
Any other questions at all? Okay, are we thinking about lunch? Oh, sorry, go on, Sam.
So, if I speak loudly, maybe the one other thing I was going to mention, which is not a research thing, but is very much on this point, is that we were contacted recently by some people from Alzheimer's Research UK, who, despite the name, obviously support FTD research as well. And they have got a link up with Google, who have volunteered, they've given some time of some of their creativity to work with Alzheimer's Research UK to try and come up with, it's called a virtual reality experience. There's something called Google Cardboard, which is literally a piece of cardboard you fold up around your iPhone, and it creates something which is very like virtual reality. And so what they're wanting to do is Google and AIUK partnership to create some scenarios which could be shown to people at festivals or exhibitions, or it could be downloaded off the internet, to try and convey something of the experience of having dementia. Because we can hear these stories, we can read news articles, but actually seeing it with your own eyes might be quite powerful. Particularly for people who are, I was going to say my generation, I was going to say Emilie's generation, who are in the majority in the privileged position of not feeling that immediately like this might be something they have to do first, to try and get people to improve their understanding of dementia as a whole. So the idea is to try and create some scenes in which you can interact a little bit. It might be, for example, going to a supermarket being told a list of items to remember, and then you play a little bit of a trick so that when you come to the end, you've actually not got all the items that you thought you'd got, so to create that sense of sort of self-doubt and, well, my memory perhaps not as good as it was. And other ways in which they can play with distorted visual image to simulate visual problems which some people with other dementias have. Anyway, it's at the quite early stages, and one has to be a little bit careful. So I went along to try and describe some of the symptoms of different dementias to this team from Google to help them get a little bit into the mindset of what sort of stories or scenarios might give them an opportunity to simulate some of these experiences of dementia. But anyway, what would be really helpful is to have some input from people who know what it's like to live with it day to day, either who have dementia themselves or who look after someone with a form of dementia. So if that's something, I'm not going to ask for volunteers now, but if that's something that interests you, it'd be, if you're able to come and talk to me at lunchtime, that'd be great. I'm actually arranging, very late notice, I'm arranging the first meeting this Wednesday, just to introduce them to a couple of people with dementia and their carers, to try and start this conversation. And I think they're going to present their sort of storyboard of what this experience might look like, and then we will be able to get the opportunity to say, no, that won't work, or that's a little bit odd, or doesn't in any way represent our experience. So to try and sort of shape what they're doing as they create it, so that the end outcome is something which will help people to understand what it might be like to have one or other type of dementia. So if that is of interest, please do come and chat with me.
So really, yeah, I just want to thank Emilie for presenting so clearly this project. And I think that for years and years and years, we've been kind of banging on in this group about the fact that the tests people do don't capture the problems that we talk about month on month in the group here. So it's fantastic to have an opportunity to contribute to the work at this stage. And I'm really, really keen that we grab that opportunity. Emilie, I know, has brought questionnaires, so feel free to take one from Emilie if you want to take one home to fill in with ideas and prompts that would be useful. But we are going to start our afternoon discussion session with a sort of brainstorm of scenarios that we would like as a group to make sure have been considered by researchers in this way. So thank you, it's a great opportunity, and you are a minefield of resource that's immensely valuable to the likes of Seb and Emilie at this stage, so it's important that we grasp it. And sorry, it's a lot of work, this meeting for you. I would very much like somebody to review this book. I'm in the process of updating our reading list and our reference and resource list, and we have a few long-standing books that are relevant and appropriate for people caring for someone with FTD. But this one was published last year. I've had a read through it and it seems okay to me, but really it would be helpful if somebody who has first-hand experience of living with somebody with FTD would mind reading through it too, so that before I put it out as a book that I think is a good read, someone else has kind of given me their critical feedback too. So if anybody's willing to take that task on, grab the book. Fantastic. Thank you.